Welcome to Soil Talks, where we explore the cutting edge of agricultural science, sustainability, and the future of farming. I am Brandon, your host, and today we are diving deep into one of the most powerful forces in regenerative agriculture, microalgae. What if the secret to healthier soil, higher yields, and more sustainable farming was not in synthetic fertilizers or in traditional amendments, but in a microscopic powerhouse that has been around for billions of years? That's exactly what today's guest, Cassidy Million, Vice President of Ag Science at PhycoTerra, is here to discuss with us. PhycoTerra products are changing the way we think about soil health, carbon inputs, and microbial life. In this episode, we will uncover the science behind microalgae, the future of regenerative agriculture, and how PhycoTerra is already transforming millions of acres of farmland. If you are a grower, a scientist, or just passionate about the future of our food systems, this is an episode you do not want to miss. Let's get started. Hey, how you doing today? We have Cassidy Million here with us today from PhycoTerra. She's the VP of Ag Sciences for PhycoTerra, and we brought her on here today just to allow her to talk to us a little bit about why regenerative agriculture is important. Not only that, but also why microalgae specifically is important, as that's what PhycoTerra does. So it's great to have you today, Cassidy. First, like to find out just what your education is, what you've done so far in agriculture.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting with you today. My background, so I'm actually a plant pathologist by training. So I have my master's and PhD in plant pathology from Ohio State University. But since grad school, I have moved on to really focusing on not just plant microbe interactions, but also the soil microbiome. So after grad school, I went and did a research stint at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in Sweden, where I was focusing on the microbiome and understanding full effects. How does a microbiome impact soil health, impacting plant health? And that's really how I got here to PhycoTerra.
Gotcha. And then kind of what led you to focus on agricultural science and regenerative agriculture, would you say?
I think that was from working across multiple different specters. So I worked in academia, I worked in the USDA and government, and then I've also worked in industry. And what I have found across all my learnings is soil health is a foundation of RegenAg, higher yields, and everything we're looking for in terms of plant health and quality. And so understanding that piece really led me into what are these RegenAg practices? What are they boiling down to? And it comes to what we focus on most, which is the microbiome and the soil health piece, and how can we actually build that over time?
Absolutely. And that's kind of what got us into it as well. It's the foundation of all life, whether it's human life, cattle, whatever it may be, and obviously plant life. It all ties back into one another. So that's great. And then as the VP of Ag Science at PhycoTerra, what is your primary focus, and how has your role evolved as the company is growing?
Yeah, great question. So my role, I cover a wide span of things here with the company. So I oversee our product development teams. Also on site in Gilbert, Arizona, we have a greenhouse and our soil microbiome lab. So I oversee those teams, as well as our agronomy teams across the US, Canada, and Latin America. So I really see everything from product development to commercialization. And I work super close with our marketing and commercialization teams as well, trying to educate on the product, but also educate on RegenAg and soil health. So how my role has changed is actually when I came onto the company a few years ago, I came in as the director of Ag Science, so just overseeing the agronomy piece in greenhouses, and I've expanded to these other roles. But really what we have been evolving into is education. We have been more education through podcasts like with you, but also through our blog posts, webinars, etc., trying to show not only growers, but food companies, how can you leverage a product like PhycoTerra to get into the RegenAg space and increase soil health over time.
Absolutely, yeah. And that it's important. Education, especially as this becomes or comes more to the forefront of agriculture, the regenerative movements and sustainability and all of these things that are coming about. It seems like at a rapid pace, that educational portion is an important part. That's why we started also the coffee and soil networking groups. And that's kind of what this is based on, the soil talks. So this will be part of that group. So it's a very important part of it. And then PhycoTerra has been the forefront of regenerative agriculture solutions. What was the inspiration behind developing PhycoTerra, or what would you say their inspiration was?
I say twofold. So one of it was from our founder. His passion is agricultural and sustainability. Every time he speaks to us, he talks about how do we make a better planet for his grandchildren and our grandchildren. So that was really the forefront of everything. But the PhycoTerra and the concept behind PhycoTerra itself comes from looking at agricultural soils. When we look at those soils, we know that the microbiome, those bacteria and fungi, are the drivers of pretty much everything in that ecosystem when it comes to crop development. However, when we look at those ag soils, about 75% of the microbes present are in this dormant phase and not functioning. And that's where the idea of PhycoTerra came into. Can we utilize a labile carbon source like microalgae to break those microbes out of dormancy and then put them back to work? And that's really where the foundation, our flagship product PhycoTerra, was born. And then we expanded our portfolio around that concept.
Great. And can you talk a little bit about who your guys' owner is actually? If you can, that's great. Just kind of explain to us, who's the owner, who's behind this? And then not only that, but it's really a prebiotic, it sounds like. So it feeds the soil bacteria itself. It wakes them up. It gives them food. But if you could just share with us a little bit about the owner or who actually operates the company.
Yeah, so actually, I can't really talk about the exact family that operates the company, but it is family owned. And when we were actually established by obtaining our microalgae library from Arizona State University. So it was in collaboration with them. And that's how we obtained the microalgae library we have today. So we have utilized that from many different applications when we first were established as a company in 2008. So in 2008, actually, our goal was to take microalgae and make alternative fuel sources. And we were successful in endeavor, however, economically wasn't feasible. So that's where we pivoted to agriculture, and that's where PhycoTerra was born. So around 2015, we've been focusing on building up PhycoTerra, but also leveraging our microalgae library to explore what are the other uses within ag as well.
Absolutely. So you guys actually started, it sounds like, in energy or energy production per se, utilizing algae, and then it's kind of switched since then. With that being said, what species of algae are you using, or what exactly are they?
Great question. So our library is a consortium of multiple different strains. But today in the product you're going to receive, if you were to look at our soil applied product, it's going to be a chlorella-like species that we're utilizing. But ours is very unique. If you're familiar with microalgae, our strain actually, it's nothing you can buy off a shelf. So you couldn't go find our chlorella, anywhere else. We have upped that production. So that's really the downfall of a lot of microalgae products, is the producing of the product and keeping up with demand. So we have trade secrets where we have found out how to produce this as 100x as the native strain as is today. The other piece is we're not an extract, we're not a hydrolysate, we're actually the entire biomass of microalgae, which is very unique. So we pasteurize that product so it's non-living. So it's easy for, number one, extends our shelf life, and two, however you want to go out to the field, you're not going to reduce the viability of that product.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great to know. And then not only that, the difference between extracts, hydrolysates, things like that. So you're getting the entire piece of microalgae whenever you go out. No issues on spraying it out of sprayers, anything like that as well, correct?
Right, correct. So a lot of people get nervous when I say, you have the entire cell of microalgae within the product, but these are extremely small in size. So to give you an idea, if you took around 6,000 of our single-celled microalgae and lined them in a single-file line, it'd go about 1/4 of an inch in distance. So very, very small, not going to clog any of your sprayers, drip tape, irrigation, no issues with that.
Great. Yeah, and now we'll kind of move on to the scientific principles in the regenerative agriculture portion of this. So the soil microbiomes, they play a crucial role in crop health and sustainability. So can you kind of explain how PhycoTerra activates native soil microbes and why this is essential for regenerative agriculture?
Right. So we're really unique. So our concept is not that we're introducing a bacteria or fungi and trying to get that to colonize the soil and then give you benefits. What our goal is we want to feed what's natively already there. So what we're doing with the microalgae is supplying a food source in the form of a well-balanced meal. So what I mean by that is it's a combination of protein, lipids, and carbohydrates to feed the native microbes, getting increase in abundance, so the number, but also diversity, because we offer what I call this buffet of food, we can feed a lot of different types of microbes. And if we look at regenerative ag, the foundation of that, if we really look at those practices and the why behind it, it is all about increasing abundance and diversity of those microbes, anywhere from, keeping living roots, introducing livestock. If we look at all those factors, when we go down to the foundation, it's all about that microbiome and the health of that microbiome.
Absolutely. So it's kind of like you're feeding them the whole sandwich, right? You got the meat, the lettuce, the bread, you got the whole thing. And that's really what you guys are focused on. And we kind of talked about that as well at the Commodity Classic where we first met regarding molasses, which we'll get into that as well, which is it's a huge topic right now. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So the next thing, many traditional soil amendments use inputs like molasses to stimulate microbial activity. How does PhycoTerra compare to molasses-based amendments, and what makes it more effective or unique?
Yeah, great question. So you were exactly right on the sandwich piece. So we like to call ourselves a turkey sandwich of the food sources, where molasses is like your bowl of Skittles, right? So when we look at this, how you determine if a product is a food source is you need to look at what's called your macromolecule diversity, which is a fancy terms of how many protein, lipids, and carbohydrates are composed in that product. So if we look at molasses or any other sugar-based product, they're going to have majority carbohydrate source, just like human nutrition. Sugar is going to be that quick carb source. When we look at PhycoTerra, we have a balanced meal of the protein, lipids, and carbohydrates. Why that matters is number one is when I'm going to talk about who you feed in the microbiome and how long you can actually feed those microbes. So with simple sugar, so think about feeding your kid a bowl of Skittles. They're going to get an energy spike and then they're going to crash, right? The microbiome does the same. You add in sugar, you're going to get a spike in a select few species, and then they crash out anywhere from about 2 or 5 days. When we feed them a well-balanced meal, that turkey sandwich, you're going to see your child have that long sustained energy. The same with a microbiome. We see feeding with PhycoTerra for about 40 to 50 days before we start to see a decline in that microbiome activity. The second piece is with the buffet style. So remember, we're offering different types of foods. We can feed the diversity, the different types of microbes, which are doing different functionalities. And that's key when you're driving soil health. With just carbohydrates, you're going to get those fast feeders. So you're going to see a select few species of microbes, and that's it. So it's all about who you feed and how long you can feed when you're talking about the food sources.
Sure. No, yeah, that's exactly right. We talk to, a lot of the people that we work with, and we always tell them, it's important to feed your soil like an athlete, right? An athlete, they don't just eat sugar. I mean, yes, they do eat carbs, but they also eat meats and, proteins, vegetables, all these other things. And so it's very similar to that. It's like if you want your soil to perform like the fat, lazy guy on the couch, then feed them a whole bunch of sugar, right? And that's what's going to happen. So easiest way to put it. So microalgae-based inputs are still a novel concept to many growers. Can you break down the science behind microalgae-derived carbon works in the soil compared to other carbon sources?
Yep, great question. So yes, microalgae is really on the forefront in terms of actually commercialized products. There's not a lot there on the market. So the idea behind this, it's just like other forms of carbon in terms it's a labile form of carbon, meaning it's going to be readily available to feed that microbiome. So the whole concept behind our product is that we're a food source to leverage those native microbes, increasing the abundance and diversity. How we do that is we have that thick cell wall of the microalgae that gets broken down over time in the soil. Kind of think of like a slow release fertilizer within the soil. And what's going to leak out of that is our active ingredient, which is going to be the food source, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, to give that to the microbes to feed off of to see that increase in abundance. So what we see over time is that we're not just getting that change at the beginning of the season and then your microbiome's back to normal. We actually see at the end of this season, we are changing your microbiome over time and completely shifting that to a healthier microbiome.
That's really cool. So those food sources or that carbon, basically you're feeding different types of microbiology, fungi, all of those different things, which will then give you a much more diverse population by the end of the year. Probably having some microbes come to life that maybe aren't working, specifically spore formers, I would guess, things like that you're giving them the exact food that they need for them to perform. That's what it sounds like.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. And And in turn with that, what's really unique about the microalgae outside of sugars, because, we talked about it, sugars can feed your microbiome. However, what also happens when you add microalgae in the soil, and this is really key in terms of aggregation and water holding capacity, is we also increase what's called EPS, or extracellular polymeric substances. So these are natively secreted from the microbiome already in bacteria, but when you add microalgae to the soil, we get more of those secretions. So we also see that we can get larger soil particles, so those macro aggregations, which is going to help reducing compaction and helping with your water holding capacity as well.
Which is an important part. Soil compaction in agriculture, it always seems like, and even no-till guys are starting to run into it now. It's a big deal, and the soil compaction ends up, they're finding that sometimes they need to open the soil up a little bit and actually disturb, unfortunately, the soil food web. But it's just due to the compaction that's happening. So that's great. Next thing, water retention, nutrient efficiency, and soil structure are major challenges in modern agriculture. How does PhycoTerra address these issues at the microbial level?
Yep. So when we look at all three of those factors, microbes are the foundation of driving all of that. So we talk a lot of the times about what we call nets and glues from PhycoTerra and what we create. So we create these nets and glues from the glues, again, coming back to that EPS from bacteria, and the nets being from fungi. So to break that down, what I mean is when we increase the abundance and diversity, we, one, are creating more hyphal growth. So that spider web-like structure that is created from fungal growth, that's going to act as, think about a spider web underneath your soil to tie those soil particles together. So driving that aggregation and holding that soil in place. And then the EPS secreted from the bacteria are going to tie them together, biological glue, forming those larger particles. So that's going to, one, help with that soil structure. Also, it's going to create more space for water to penetrate down into the soil. So when you get a rain event, it's not just sitting on top of that soil, it's actually going to penetrate and then become stored. And then when we're talking about nutrient availability, we know microbes are key in this, not only unlocking the tied up nutrients that are in your soil, but also making what you're putting out more efficient. Those microbes are going to be doing mineralization to convert those tied up nutrients into a plant available form, but also helping the plant know, hey, there's nutrients around, and transport those actually into those root structures into the plant itself.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And it's important, especially in really arid conditions. There's major issues. Even this year here where we're at in Montrose, soil moisture is down drastically at this point. And so it's going to become, I think, more and more of a topic, people not having enough water or people having a hard time getting water even into their soils over time. And so that's wonderful that it does open them up like that. Next thing, regenerative agriculture focuses on improving soil health long term. How do you measure the long-term impact of PhycoTerra applications on soil microbiomes and farm productivity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's many different ways we can measure success. So for us, obviously, we're trying to build soil health over time. But for our grower and farmers, the bottom line, obviously, is yield and ROI from season one. So we want to show both, that we can do both. We can give you a yield increase, ROI, but also build soil health. So we measure that in different ways. For us, we actually do soil sampling where we want to understand how we're impacting the microbiome. And then soil health factors for us would be water holding capacity and soil aggregation. So what we do is we come in 2 weeks post-application and we measure microbial abundance, because that's when we should start seeing that peak after the application of PhycoTerra in abundance. And then we come in at the end of season one and start measuring your soil health factors, being the water holding capacity, aggregation, and again, the microbiome. So we do those testings, and there's third-party testings you can do from like PLFA analysis to show you those changes, et cetera. So we use internal lab, external, and then we also do long-term studies. So right now we have a field that's been using PhycoTerra for 5 years. So what we've seen from year 1 to year 2 is that we actually doubled our water productivity and nutrient use efficiency, and we can actually start changing the microbiome, like I mentioned before. So we do full DNA sequencing to understand how we're shifting those communities and how those communities are correlated with those soil health factors and yield and ROI. So we have a pretty good understanding of what we're impacting and that long-term benefit. And it's exactly what you said. Year after year, soil health, we have to remember, is a journey. It's going to take us a long time to build, depending on where you're starting, because we didn't ruin our soil health in 1 year. So we like to really measure those impacts year after year. But we do like to say within 1 year, you're going to see a result in terms of yield and ROI.
Gotcha. So that DNA sequencing that you guys are doing, are you guys using somebody like Biomakers or something like that, where you can really see what's going on in that soil, or a company similar to them, that you're really seeing what's going on in the soil? You know the exact communities that are there, what are proliferating, maybe what are subsiding, things like that. So it's really, it's pretty pointed research.
Yeah, it's very in depth. And so actually there's third party, like I said, so there's PLFA, there's Biomakers, there's a lot of different DNA sequencing platforms you can do. For ours, we're actually doing our own internal, because we do have a soil microbiome lab. So we do a full metagenomic sequencing. So we're trying to get to the complete understanding of everything that we're impacting. But those are great third-party tools if you're a grower trying to use PhycoTerra and understanding how we're changing, that you could implement and really see the results of the impact of that application.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I figured at the Commodity Classic, when I saw your guys' booth there and things like that, that you guys are science-based. You know, you had people there in lab coats. Like, that doesn't surprise me that you guys have DNA sequencing capabilities. So does that also allow, say, a company like ours, if we wanted to send in, say, some of the biology that we utilize in field, to potentially be mixed with, the PhycoTerra, to see like what growth factors we could get? You guys do things like that ever?
Yeah, so we have various different partners we worked with in the past, companies like yours, that where we, yes, together have partnered to see, is a 1 + 1 = 3 scenario. So partnering with other technologies, but also, yes, our labs, we have great resource. We are research-based company at the foundation. That's really our goal, is to understand how things work before we go to market. So we have a lot of different resources that we could definitely partner with you and explore how can we utilize PhycoTerra to increase biology of not only the native, but also what you're putting out there as well.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. We'll move on. So from a scientific perspective, what are the biggest misconceptions about regenerative agriculture, would you say? And how does PhycoTerra approach or address these misunderstandings?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it all goes back to, how do you define RegenAg? I mean, we use a lot of the time regen, sustainability hand in hand. If you talk to someone, they're probably going to give you a different answer of what it is. So I think for us as a company, it was defining, what do we mean when we're saying RegenAg? What do we mean when we talk sustainability? And I think what's really unique for us is when we're usually talking RegenAg is you need to implement a practice change. There's all sorts of things you can do, from cover cropping to reducing tillage, and all of that is from an operational level, which is usually a high economic impact for that grower to implement on their operation. So for us, PhycoTerra is unique because what we want to do is we want to add something out there that, one, they don't have to change their operation. Take whatever ride you're already going to the field, throw us in, and we're going to give you that regen benefit without having to change an operational practice. So it's something easy to implement, number one. And two, we don't want to have a large economical impact. That's the biggest thing to the grower. We want to be low cost input, but big benefit in terms of changing soil health quickly. So that's really how we position ourselves in the market, is we want to be a tool in the toolbox for RegenAg, as well as really a no-brainer. You don't have to change your practice, low economical input. So if it's a journey you want to start taking, it's a great option without having to do anything large to disrupt your operation as it is today.
That's great. Yeah. And that's kind of even how we started, even back, in 2008, when we started bringing biology to market. We were working, and we still do work with conventional growers, and just integrating biology, or say your products, into their current practices is a really important part, just to get them to start maybe taking a different route. We're not asking them to change their whole operation to add PhycoTerra or biology or whatever it may be. We're just asking them, hey, look, you know what, let's just add an investment into the farm versus just always a complete expense to the farm, right, over time. So that's great that you guys are doing that. Next thing, regenerative agriculture, it's gaining traction, but scalability remains a question. How has PhycoTerra successfully scaled its solutions to meet the needs of both small and large growers?
Yeah, great question. So that comes back to how we produce our microalgae. Like I mentioned before, that's really the hindrance of a lot of the companies trying to enter the space of microalgae is the production piece. It's usually a low production method, and we have specialized in the production technology of microalgae. That's the foundation of our company. So scalability from that standpoint is not an issue in terms of actually producing the microalgae. And number two is, and you know this if you're working with biological products, producing the same thing when you're starting with a biological is different. And we've really mastered a really tight spec sheet to make sure that every batch is identical to the one before. So since we've been around since 2008, that was our foundation, is mastering microalgae and then adapting it to agriculture. I think the biggest thing for us for scalability is just actually education-wise and getting these resources to the growers and to agriculture to educate them on what microalgae are doing and how we can implement them into their practices.
That's great. Yeah, no, and it's a very important piece of the puzzle, right? There's a lot of companies out there that are trying to come to market at this point and just throwing things in containers and trying to sell them. But that research guaranteeing every batch is the same, you have to have replicable results over and over and over. And that's great that you guys are working on that portion of it as well. And not only that, I know you guys have trade secrets that you mentioned earlier as well in order to be able to scale the algae, which is something that a lot of companies are moving to versus just patents. There's certain secrets that they're not willing to share with everybody, to keep, I guess you could say, a competitive advantage in the marketplace, which is that's understandable. So next, what types of crops and farming systems benefit the most from PhycoTerra? Are there specific soil types or environmental conditions where it's most effective?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So what's interesting about us, and it's, again, to reminder, we're a non-living product. So we don't have to colonize the plant or the soil to be beneficial. You just have to get us to the soil. So with that, our hindrance in terms of actually causing benefit is not going to be pigeonholed by the soil type or the cropping system. So we've tested the product on over 58 different cropping systems across the US, Canada, and Latin America. And that's not what's impacting how PhycoTerra is actually going to provide benefit to the soil. So in terms of looking at the best soil types, we've also tested this on over 2,000 different soils. And in terms of mode of action, increasing abundance and diversity, we don't see a direct correlation to the soil type. But what we see is, for instance, if we take the Arizona soil, desert soil, that's low productivity versus if we go out to the Midwest and like a rich Iowa soil, which is highly productive, what we'll see is that we don't necessarily impact the microbiome at the same rate. So in Arizona deserts, we see about a 33x increase in microbial activity, where in Iowa, we may see a 2 to 3x increase just because there's already a large microbiome activation. So that's where we see the difference in terms of results, but also to what we're trying to figure out and what's unknown is how do microbiome activity and diversity directly correlate to yield. And that's where the research still needs to be understood, because just because you see a 33x increase in microbial activity doesn't mean you're going to see a 33x increase in yield, because there's all these different factors. So there's still a lot we're trying to learn ourselves on, how does the microbiome directly impact yield and ROI?
No, that's great. Yeah. And those guys out in the Midwest, they have it good. I tell you, they don't have to worry so much. But we're very similar to where you're at. We're in a high desert valley. Soils are not the best out here. So it's good to hear that you guys can really increase, you say the microbial biomass or the microbial activity of a soil by 33x. That's a big deal. So next, how many acres have PhycoTerra products been applied to so far? And what insights have you gained from growers using them?
Yeah, great question. So right now we're on around 1 to 2 million acres. So like I said, we are not only in the US, but we're also in Canada. And then we're also within Brazil, Mexico, Guatemala, and Peru. So we're across multiple different acres, multiple different cropping systems, from broad acre crops to specialty crops such as potato, almonds, permanent crops, etc. So we've had great success with not only PhycoTerra soil applied, but we also have a seed treatment product that has reached about 1 million acres itself. And then we just actually launched a foliar product in June of last year that's starting to expand. We've learned a lot. Like I said, foundationally, we're a research company. So we wanted to make sure we understood rates, application timings, and variability of the product performance before we went to market. So luckily we had a lot of that understood, but growers, they try something new with your product that you would never think of. So we've learned different timings. Stacking with other carbon-based products has probably been our biggest learning. Stacking with other biologicals, by carbon-based, I mean humic acid, fulvic acids, and seeing synergies like that in the field. So really the growers are our educational foundation, and we've actually partnered with them and started what we call a grower advisory panel. Last year was our pilot program where we're actually partnered directly with growers. We give them protocols, but we learn tremendous impacts from them on what they're mixing it with, ideas on how they want to use it and increase their cropping production.
That's great. So are you guys finding, like, can you mix this? Say there is a conventional farmer that's using, conventional fertilizers, unfortunately, maybe herbicides, things like that. At the end of the day, so can your product actually go out in situations like that as well, like with conventional products then?
Yeah, so that's actually, I would say, majority of acres we're on right now is with conventional growers. So a lot of the times PhycoTerra is being applied broadcast or in furrow with, NPK fertilizers, calcium-based fertilizers, herbicides. Our foliar product is actually targeted with a fungicide right to the field. So we're really looking at, we want to be able to be paired with whatever. And that comes back to the pasteurization process. Since our product's non-living, you're not going to have issues with reducing the variability because you can't make us more dead than we already are, right? So it's really easy. Hopefully, we're trying to make it a no-brainer to get to the field.
Wow, that's great. That's user friendliness is most important. Producers want to be able to keep some of their systems in place and at least be able to, like I said, make an investment into their farm just as a complete expense is continuously going out. So that's great to hear. What challenges have you faced in getting growers to adopt microalgae-based solutions, and what strategies have worked in shifting the industry perspective, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's all about education. So microalgae is new. I like to think of it like we think about humic acids. I feel like now humic acids are almost becoming a commodity at this point. We 10, 15 years ago, no one really knew about them. The ones that did were very progressive growers. They were utilizing them, and now it's much more widespread. I mean, we're seeing them widespread in corn and soybean acres. And I feel like when you make it there, you've made it as a product. So I think we're really in that segment of educating behind the importance of what microalgae do, the importance of feeding your microbiome and leveraging what you already have. So we're really in the education piece. It's been a tough road because we're really, I think, the only ones like planting that flag and behind it, but we have the research behind it, and it's really just getting partners such as you on board that can understand the importance of soil health and really come back to educating how microbes play a role in that and how we can feed and leverage them. So education right now is probably the forefront of what we're trying to do.
That's perfect. Yeah. And that's exactly what we're seeing as well. People need to be educated, and that's the biggest thing. It's been a long road since 2008. We were waving this banner back then and people thought we were pretty crazy. But time's passed and things have changed. And so now it's the educational portion, which, like you said, it's important. And that's great that you guys are doing that. I'm going to go ahead and move into the last part of this, talking more about the future of agriculture, kind of your closing thoughts. Looking ahead, what role do you see microalgae-based soil amendments playing in the next decade, say, of regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, I know for us, I mean, there's a lot on the forefront that we're looking at. PhycoTerra right now, we're using a single strain of microalgae, like I told you, is chlorella-like. We don't think we won the microalgae lottery in terms of this is the best strain out there. So we're continuously trying to learn and find the next best PhycoTerra. And I think there's other companies out there too trying to explore what they can do with microalgae, not just the cells, but the byproducts as well. There's a lot of things that you can make from microalgae. So for us is not only improving our product, but also looking at different applications where I think the phytosphere is going to be the forefront of agriculture. There's a few people talking about this right now, but that region on the leaf surface that harbors the microbiome, I think that is where there's not a ton of research. It's starting to gain, but there's just like your brain gut health. We know the microbiome on the leaf is talking down to the roots. So how can we leverage that and close the cycle? So that's what we're focused on right now. How do we continue to learn about the microbiome, not just in the soil, but on all sorts of pieces of the plant, from vegetation down to the roots.
That's really awesome. Yeah. And it's things like quorum sensing, things like that, that years ago when we talked about it, like I said, people thought we were crazy, but it really does. I mean, the communities in the soil talk, the plants talk, to the microbiome in the soil. It's great that you guys are doing research on that, because that is, I believe as well, that's the forefront of it. In the next 10 years, we're going to be seeing more and more of those types of situations come up, and then we'll be able to learn more and more and more about those things, especially just the communication that the microbial communities have. So that's great. And then last but not least, if you could give just one key piece of advice to growers looking to, say, transition to regenerative practices or more eco-friendly practices on their farm, you could say, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say talk to your neighbors. I think that's the biggest thing, is there's people out there that have done and adopted to RegenAg, and they have the blueprint already. So there's no use in beating your head against the wall and trying all these different things. So talk to your neighbor who has implemented a practice, or talk to someone close that has switched to RegenAg and learn from them. Also, trusted advisors, they're hard to find, but when you have one, ask all the questions you can. I think that's really key, is working off who's around you, because they can save you a lot of time and headache, and tell you the stupid things they did so you can avoid those mistakes yourself and get to that path to success quicker. There is a lot of education out there, some good, some bad, but once you find it, just keep asking questions, because I think RegenAg is the next step as well, but it's not going to be a copy and paste. I know there's a lot of practices out there, but they're not going to fit into your operation. So leverage around you, leverage the knowledge that you can get access to, and just ask questions.
Yeah, no, that's great. Absolutely. And I think that's the thing that we say as well. Not necessarily will all farmers share all their information, right? Which is the tough part sometimes, especially when they find things that work well, because they're all in competition. But I agree 100%. You have to continuously leverage the research that's out there, the good research, that is, the people, your neighbors, anywhere you can get information. And there's going to be more and more information coming out as time goes, especially I think we're going to see a massive ramp up of that here in the next few years, say 5 years or so. There's going to be a lot more education out there. So that's great. So now what I would like to do, Cassie, if you don't mind, I'm going to open it up. This was live. We have people here. If you could maybe answer their questions, I'm going to grab those. First one, longevity in the soils. How long does PhycoTerra last, or what's the longevity look like?
Yep. So PhycoTerra, once you get it to the soil, it's going to feed that microbiome for about 40 days on average, sometimes longer, depending on the soil type and environment. So when I mean feed is we're going to see an increase in that abundance and diversity for about that 40 days, but then you're going to start to see a slow, steady decline. But the thing is once these microbes start to die off, they're cannibals, so they're going to eat one another, and also the enzyme they secrete eat off one of that. So you're going to start to see a decrease, but then about 50, 60 days later, another slight increase. But around 40 days is going to be the optimal for that feeding for PhycoTerra.
Gotcha. That's great. And then would we just reapply? How does that work? Do you reapply after that to get that boost again, or what does that look like? What does application, I guess, look like? And then also one other question is cost per acre. That's another thing. It's always that's the number one question always. So I think those are the two things. Will we reapply, and then cost per acre? What are we looking at?
Yeah, so it's going to be depending on cropping system is our application. So if we're talking broad acre crops like corn, soybean, wheat, cotton, etc., you're going to be around a quart an acre around planting. So really flexible, whether that be broadcast in furrow 2x2 side dress. When we're talking specialty crops, so if we're talking potato, we're around a gallon in the planter band, or you can split that half in the planter band and then around tuber initiation. Permanent crops is going to be 4 times through the season, around two to 3 quarts every application 4 times. So it's going to be a little bit different depending on cropping system. And in terms of reapplication is when we're talking about broad acre crops, yes, you could come back and do reapplication. But if you go to our website, all of our data is actually published on the website. So if you take a look at that data with broad acre crops, that's just one application, one time. So that's our foundation. But we'll work with operations if they're trying to achieve different goals, but you could go out and possibly do additional applications. And the reason why it's only once is because once those roots are established in the soil system, they're secreting their own enzymes. So they're going to help add more carbon to that system to continue those micropopulations that we kicked off right around planting.
Great. And then that other question I had, cost per acre, what are we looking at?
Again, that's going to depend on cropping system and the rates. But if we're talking, let's talk broad acre cropping systems, think of around $10 to $15 an acre.
$10 to $15 per acre. That's great. That's an easy input or an easy investment for a farm to make. That's going to really benefit them, especially, growing just healthy soil microbiome and then, plant production as well. That's what it comes from, especially with the increases you're talking. That's amazing. So at the end of the day, I guess microalgae, it is the forefront. I believe it's a great food source, to feed the soil microbiome. If not one of the best, obviously. Like you said, you're feeding them an entire sandwich or a buffet, which is great. That's wonderful. Any other things that you would just like to add at the end of this that maybe we didn't cover, or things that you would like people to know?
Yeah. I think just going back to the foundation of, if you're going to be going into this regen path, or just soil health in general, however you want to label it, is just patience is key. And I think a lot of time it's a paradigm shift that we have to give with biostimulant and biological-based products, that a grower will try it in their operation 1 year, they don't see what they want, and then they don't want to continue the product. Give it some time. Make sure you're setting yourself up for success for trialing as well. Make in terms of when you introduce a product or a practice change, don't introduce 5 other things with it. Look at that and holistically set up a trial. Also, ask the questions of what testing do you need to do to prove that the product's working. Being able to understand that will really shape, one, to understand how the product's working, but just like fertilizer doesn't pay every year. So give that 2 to 3 year testing a chance with these biological products, because they're not all going to fit all operations, but you can find one that's going to fit yours as well. Just making sure you're testing it correctly, I think is key.
Perfect. All right, Cassidy, we'll definitely appreciate you being on here today. Again, just it means a lot that we're able to find other research-backed companies that we can, share soil health, share those things to the masses. It's important. It's very important that we get this information out to people. So we just want to thank you for sure for being on the Soil Talks podcast today. Just appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you today.
Yeah, great talking to you. Take care, Cassidy.
Thank you.
That's a wrap on today's episode of Soil Talks. A huge thank you to Cassidy Million for sharing her expertise on the incredible science behind PhycoTerra and the game-changing role of microalgae in soil health and regenerative agriculture.